to the cloud. Extraordinary things technology can do. So I've just muted everyone, and then I was going to ask a question. Give me a thumbs up if you can see the first slide of the presentation. Ooh.
Oh, going on.
That's not a positive response.
Oh, shush.
Okay, participants. Unmute all. Can you see the slide that says, how is your new normal looking?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. So then I can mute you again. And I suppose we can start with what do you think, Sue? Shall we start?
Yes, I think we'll get going now.
Okay, so good evening, welcome to the second webinar of the Grant Rule Trust on the concept of building back better. Today, Sue is going to be talking about how does your new normal look, what's changed, what's happened. You will have the option to join in the discussion. We've got a couple of questions, mainly at the end. If you can, on telephones or on a separate page of your browser, go to menti.com or scan this and enter the code that is marked there. We'll have the first question, which is an easy one, if it's willing to move. There we are. From where are you joining us? Okay, an easy one to start with. So if you can get it online, just type in wherever you're calling from. I got there faster because I had actually typed in the name before.
I think if Menti's a step too far, perhaps you could put it in the chat window. That's what some people have done.
There we are. Where's the chat box? So I've put the link in the chat box. Jill has written Birmingham. Okay, we'll move on. Oh, there, Edenbridge. All right, I'll hand over to, there we are, now things are happening. Okay, I will hand over to Sue. Start looking at closing down this. I got out. And Sue, you ready?
Yeah.
Taking control.
Anything could happen now.
It's all yours.
It worked just now when I clicked it. Why is it not working?
There we are.
There we go. Right. So yes, so this is called "How is your new normal looking?" Whoops. Now I need to go back again. If I type 2 or 3, that should get me there, shouldn't it? Sorry, I'm having to use Peter's screen because of the slight issue, and it won't seem to go backwards. Can you back to the previous slide, please, Peter?
There we are.
That's it. That's better. It takes a little. There's a delay in place, and I clicked it too many times. So sorry about that. Yes. So it is called "How is your new normal?" But I'm coming at this perhaps to share some of my thoughts and discoveries and my feelings about what the new normal was looking like, in the hope that you know that will be of benefit to all of us, because I've spent quite a lot of time in lockdown on webinars and engaging with groups and others who are looking to build back better, and there's quite a lot going on out there. So I thought I'd start by just sort of taking a quick look back at what actually happened over the last few months, and what's happening now. We've come through the first shock of coronavirus, when we had to all lock down, and applaud the NHS, and they ran to the front line and kept us going. We're starting to come out of lockdown and get the economy going again. Now, I don't know about you, but when we all stopped for a while and the skies cleared and the roads fell silent and nature took a bit of a long breath of relief from the activities of humankind, it felt to me like there was a chance to change. We were all forced to reflect on what we value. And many of us were given the gift of time, which is often missing from relentlessly busy lives. When you've got time, you have time to cook, you can eat better. You don't have to rely on fast food, takeaways, junk food. If you have time to think, maybe you make better decisions. But now we're all scrambling to get things moving again. That brief glimpse of a different normal seems to be slipping away from us. It does quite often feel like the chance for change is being quickly wrested out of our hands. But in the first webinar in this series on building back better, I did say this is a long journey. And there's no good us looking for the grand design when we're just still laying the foundations. But I think we have started laying the foundations. I don't know how long this is going to take to change. But I was going to go on to say that there's a perception that the world of global finance didn't learn the lessons of the economic collapse of 2008. Well, I don't think that's true. I think what is true is that change takes a long time. Quote actually from my novel at the top there, "Dreams happen overnight, reality takes such a damn long time." So if I say that the financial industry did learn some lessons from the economic collapse of 2008, in 2015, the United Nations published their 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And those goals have driven a movement to embed environmental and social responsibility into financial markets. And by doing that, it's embedded into business practice. The first significant shift in that direction came in 2000, came when the pension funds, who do tend to look at long-term investments, realised that sustainability simply means prudent investment choices. You need to invest in an industry that's got a future and not ones that are trying to destroy the future.
Sue,
Yes, sorry.
So just a sec, I'm sorry. It seems that the pictures on this slide and the next one have disappeared.
Oh, that was happening with my version of the slide as well.
Yes,
Um,
I will try to get.
oh, now your sound's gone. Okay, if you just bear with me a moment, what I will do is get an earlier version up, which I think has got photos in, pictures in. Sorry about this.
If you keep on going, Sue, I will fix slide 6 and the following ones before you get to it.
Okay, right. So actually, the bit that's missing is simply a picture showing the 16 Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, we was saying this change is now rippling through to where investors are deciding to put their money, and that is a very powerful game changer, I think. The term that the business community use for this change is environmental and social governance. That is now increasingly embedded into what businesses report on. So it's steering a lot of their behaviours. In fact, one of the most encouraging of the many newsletters that clutter up my inbox is one I get from something that calls itself the Business Strategy Magazine for Europe's Asset Management Professionals. And when we can see, yes, we can see the words because the slide is taken from an article they published in June 2020 headed COVID-19, are we at the tipping point for ESG, which is environmental and social governance? You know, making environmental and social issues have equal weight with financial performance is what that means. And they believe that the tipping point has been reached and there's no going back now. Environmental and social governance are increasingly embedded in the corporate and public psyche. And one of the key reasons for that is that the people worldwide are concerned about climate change and about social inequality. And when we can get to the next slide, Peter, if we could go to that one, or shall I do it? Okay, right. Because without the push from the UN is not going to be enough unless there's a corresponding pull from ordinary people. Like it or not, we do live in a global market economy, and the law on supply and demand applies. The Funds Europe article itself goes on to say if climate change objectives are to really matter to companies and investors, lots of people have to care about it. But they do. The Funds Europe article goes on to quote a survey conducted by the Yale Programme on Climate Change Communication, conducted in April 2020, so this is in the middle of the pandemic, showed that 73% of Americans think climate change is happening and 66% are at least somewhat worried about it. And this is conducted, as I say, in the middle of the pandemic, in a country governed by a president who denies and actively tries to accelerate climate change. And I think the US is probably lagging behind. An Ipsos Mori survey called Climate Change and the Weather, which was conducted in the UK in July 2019, showed 85% of respondents were concerned about climate change. And the concern crossed the party political divide. Although Conservative supporters were the least concerned, that was only compared to the supporters of the other parties, and it still showed that 83% of Conservative voters are concerned about climate change. It's just that the Labour and Lib Dem supporters were in the 90s. So it's still an overwhelming majority. It's not a party political issue. I think the main reason that we're still arguing over climate change is it's not about denying the science, it's because people don't know what to do about it. And the issue we have is getting particularly those in positions of power and authority to admit that they don't know what to do about it. I think the more apparent power an individual holds, probably the more used they are to being seen as a leader, the more daunted they must be by the prospect of dealing with this huge issue that the traditional tools that they deal with things with don't work. That doesn't apply. We have to change our ways of thinking about problem solving. So the danger we face is that these people who are having the reins of power in their hands ignore it, because it's not going to go away. And another word for sustainable is living. So I kind of leave you to draw your own conclusions on the synonym for unsustainable. But the thing is that life is not a command and control hierarchy where governments can wave a magic wand and resolve complex issues like our dysfunctional relationship with our natural environment at a stroke. This is a massive change we have to make. And this sort of reactionary politics we have at the moment, where you see a problem and you respond to it, is not really up to the job. I think sustainability, as I said, these issues transcend party politics. Nature's like a virus. It doesn't listen to human arguments, and it doesn't behave how humans want it to behave. But that's not to say we can't get a good understanding of how it does behave when we collect enough data. But that's why, like dealing with coronavirus, to have a fair and just transition to sustainable ways of living depends on having science-based planning. Bigotry and dogma won't get us there. I think the time for learning to distinguish expert advice from stakeholder salesmen is long overdue. I think we need to empower communities to tackle both climate change and coronavirus. We need to be putting pressure on our government to support community capability with intelligent funding, effective organisation strategies, and the necessary legislation. I think the time for cross-party cooperation is here. And what I would urge everybody to do is to lobby their MP, their own representative in Parliament, to take this matter seriously. I recently took part in a mass lobby of Parliament organised by a group called the Climate Coalition. And there were a group of us in Argyll and Bute, quite a few of us actually. We got together in advance of the meeting, which of course was held online because we're still in lockdown, we get a physical meeting. But we requested an online meeting with our MP. And a group of us got together in advance, discussed how we were going to approach it. And it was actually a very interesting and constructive meeting we had with our MP, Brendan O'Hara, who is SNP, so he's not in government. But we got a better understanding of the issues he faces in managing his time, in doing his job effectively. And we also understood how we could help support him. There's quite a lot of people in Argyll and Bute who are deeply involved in environmental issues because we're quite a rural community here. And it tends to attract mad green people who want to go and live an alternative lifestyle. So there's a lot of knowledge and capability in this county. And we've now set up this group, Time for Change Argyll and Bute, which is continuing to support Brendan. Whenever we spot opportunities for him to ask a question or put something to a minister or something, we can put that right in front of him and say, here's the research, Brendan, here's the question, and he will go and ask it. And if more people engaged with their MPs and actually got them to take this matter seriously and understand the levels of concern that the slide is showing is latent within their own supporters, I think we might begin to see something change in politics. And the fact of the matter is, we can't tackle climate change or coronavirus through individual efforts alone or even national efforts alone. These are things we have to tackle together, nationally and internationally, individually, and as communities, in our communities. We've got to start focusing our resources on human well-being and sustainable living. Now we're going to get the slide to move on. because what it should be showing you is the donut model. Oh, good, there we go. This is what's being called the donut model of economics, which shows that economic activity and social activity, human activity, all needs to take place within environmental limits. It's a no-brainer. That's what sustainability means. There is an organisation called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which the Grant Trust has just become an organisational member of. And it's called WEALL for short. WEALL brings together around the world all the science, research and knowledge that can transition us to a globally sustainable way of living. And not only in terms of climate change are we talking about sustainability. I think it's no accident that the country that appears at the moment to have dealt most effectively with COVID-19 is New Zealand. And that's a country with a government that's put the principles of the wellbeing economy at the heart of its policies and planning. You see, collectively, humanity knows what a low carbon economy looks like. We know a good deal about how it can work and a lot about the benefits it will deliver in terms of human well-being. All that's lacking is the political will to transition to it. Politics is driving us apart at the very time we need to be coming together. We talk about politics all the time in terms of left versus right. And that's predicated on the argument that the economy relies on a balance between capital and labour. In the UK, we have political parties that represent those two poles, and our electoral system operates on a fairly basic, fairly crude, I would say, system of adversarial politics, which puts one or the other in charge, capital or labour. And increasingly, it's put capital in charge. And I think that the electorate quite sensibly figure that those who deal in money probably know how to run an economy. Reasonable assumption. I might argue with it, but it's a reasonable assumption. And apart from that choice, do you want labour in charge or capital in charge, the electorate are not usually asked to express an opinion about political matters. And when they are, they're subject to an avalanche of misinformation, which leaves us all pretty well ill-equipped to reach any kind of informed opinion. But I have said before, environmentalism transcends the capital versus labour argument. It's in no one's interest to prop up a system that's destroying the conditions for life on Earth. All we're really arguing about is how quickly we can do it. And if we listen to the science, we don't have all that long before it's too late to do anything except cope with the consequences of inaction. Now, you can see what the consequences of inaction have been for Britain in coronavirus. You know, we have not performed well compared to other countries, and America, of course, is even worse. That realization that the economy relies on labour as well as capital came out of the financial crash of the 1930s. And I think the financial crash of 2008-9 shows us, proves beyond doubt, that economic activity must take place within the envelope of environmental constraints. And that includes the constraints of the human society in which it operates. The global economy must serve people and planet. In other words, environmental and social sustainability. And that's why the markets are embedding those things in business. The last people to adapt to where the argument has gone have been the politicians. I think what we've been witnessing over the last couple of decades is not an argument between left and right, but it's been the politics of denial, which ignores the fault lines of the current economic system, which is no better example of that as the Trump administration. And on the other side, we've had the politics of protest, which is running along behind, screaming at the things that we believe that are being done wrong, because we can see the damage that's being done. But we're just pointing the finger and demanding that someone else fixes it. Well, I think the good news is that the pandemic has transformed the politics of protest. And what they've transformed it into is the politics of consensus, or as I prefer to describe it, politics of hope. because many, if not all, of the pressure groups and campaigning organisations that have been feeding the politics of protest are beginning to build this consensus around a just transition to a sustainable economic model. It's almost a no-brainer. You know, if we want economic recovery, we have to have environmental recovery as well. The two are not opposites. They go hand in hand with each other. And actually being a member of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and I've done a couple of Zoom calls with other members around the world, it's exciting and exhilarating to find out just how much work is going on globally to deliver that just transition. The trouble is the popular political discourse is still mired in all the old battles. It's still nursing all the old grudges and picking at all the old wounds. And that's why the next Grant Will Trust webinar will be focusing on individual well-being, because it's painful living through this. And I'm sure I speak for others. You know, I go from the meetings where I'm discussing this future that would be so much better, back to the news where we're still grubbing around in this mud fight. It's depressing. And before we can heal these divisions in our society, I think we've got to help heal ourselves. And only then can we create the ethos of mutual aid, which allows us to move forward in hope. We've got to work out the way ahead together, but rational debate, which is the only way we're going to work out how we're going to deal with this, that comes from a place of calm reflection and a sense of responsibility. It doesn't come from anger and fear and insecurity and powerlessness and people trying to assert their rights by being irresponsible. So we're going to move on now to look at what we might have learned about the economy during lockdown. Because we did learn that the economy can hit the pause button, albeit temporarily. But for most of us, the economy is not really about abstracts like GDP or financial markets or oil prices or hedge funds. It's not even about ESG, we think. For us, it's about having an income. It's about where we buy our food. It's about how we get to work and who's educating the children. They're being educated, whether the old folks are being looked after, or it's about medical supplies, and it's about protective equipment. It's about healthcare. And it's about public services. That is part of our economy. It's really about whether we have a healthy, secure and prospering population, whether this is a country we can be proud of living in. The word economy actually comes from a combination of Greek words for household management. This was one of Grant's favourite things, was always to look at the roots of words and find out where they came from. So if the economy means managing the household, well, that means providing for all the basic needs of the people who live in the household. It's about cooking and buying provisions and preserving provisions and making sure there's enough to go around and everyone's got somewhere to sleep and they've got clean clothes and somebody's looking after the children and the sick and all those things. So that, to me, is what a national economy should do. That is the reason we're supposedly all going back to work, coronavirus or no coronavirus, because the economy is all about managing our day-to-day living. It's essential. The Bank of England defines economics as the study of scarcity, because the resources are limited and the demand for them is infinite, so it's about balancing them. But the Bank of England always goes on to say that the demand is infinite because we always want more. Well, now we're all needing to get back to generating an income and educating the children and getting the monetary blood circulating around the system again. Maybe this is the time to start questioning that fundamental statement. Do we always want more, or do we want better? Do we individually and as communities have our own environmental and social responsibility goals? And the other question, of course, is how much choice are we going to get? because economically the outlook is pretty grim. The Bank of England, quote them again, they forecast a 14% reduction in economic activity as a result of lockdown. I don't really know what a 14% drop in economic activity means. And I haven't really heard any politician explain it. I haven't asked any journalists ask the question. I haven't heard anybody come up with a meaningful plan as to how we are going to respond to a 14% reduction in economic activity. And that's before we add the potential damage of a no-deal Brexit, which is coming down the line at the end of the year. So what do is stand like rabbits in the headlines and wait to be run down by this driverless juggernaut rushing towards us. Well, how about if we rewind and come at this from a different direction? The Bank of England forecasts a 14% reduction in economic activity. This means we are embarking on a transition to a sustainable economy, the kind of economy that will allow us to restore the balance between human activity and environmental sustainability, the kind that allows us to focus on quality rather than on quantity, focus on durable rather than cheap, on repairable rather than disposable, on local rather than global supply chains, and maybe on different and more equitable models of wealth distribution that value individual humans as individual humans, not workers or consumers, capitalists or socialists. In other words, it enables us to manage the household properly. We've never had a better opportunity to make this change. The economy is drastically shrinking anyway, so let's chaotically adapt and use it to our advantage. There are numerous little local initiatives springing up everywhere. There's a lot in Scotland, but there's an awful lot in England and Wales as well. And they're addressing all sorts of different aspects of sustainable living, of what could become the new normal, from anything from local food production to recycling to sustainable housing projects to community healthcare and social interaction, you know, befriending people so that you're addressing loneliness, all sorts of things. I'd urge everybody just to go and find out what's going on in your neighbourhood, because I think you might be surprised. It is time to stop allowing the noise and the nonsense to divide us. But there's no getting away from the fact that it's going to divide us for a while longer. I think there's going to be some very rough seas to navigate over the coming months. So that's all the more reason to start thinking about strengthening our mutual aid network that surfaced during lockdown. So we've got something to hold on to through the coming storms, come out safe the other side to rebuild. I think you may have your own views on the leadership we're getting from the current UK government, but it can't be denied that Britain has a higher death toll from COVID-19 than comparable countries, or that the pandemic has revealed serious gaps in our public services. There's an awful lot of people going to be left stranded in the wake of the pandemic, financially and in terms of healthcare, particularly mental health care. It's estimated that as many as 1 in 10 of those who contract COVID-19 suffer this long tail effect, which leaves them unable to work and sometimes unable to look after themselves for weeks and months. One of our own trustees, Lindsay, my daughter, contracted the virus in March and she's still unwell. I've had exchanges with her today. She's had to call the GP again because she's had another problem arise. There's little recognition and support for those suffering these long-term effects of coronavirus, though I have to say the NHS is, as usual, being amazing in the way they are trying to put stuff in place for this completely unprecedented call. 1 in 10 is going to be a lot of people. And that's without all the ongoing effects of the mental, physical, emotional and financial health impacts of the population. That's not going to go away. It's going to go way beyond the capacity of the NHS and the already compromised social welfare system to support it unless we change something. So that's why the second of Grant Law Trust's focus groups, as well as individual well-being, the next one is around localisation. It's around distributed government, meeting the need where it is in our communities. Locally, we can identify needs and work as a community to provide the resources required to meet those needs. Locally, we can devise emergency response plans, prepare and train teams of volunteers to support the professional services in a crisis. We can establish secure food supplies and tackle housing needs and make informed planning decisions. We can generate our own energy. We can generate revenue. And we can mourn together. We can celebrate together, support each other and learn together. Maybe we can reach out to other communities to share our pride in who we are and learn from them. Locally, we can also start to debate the issues that divide us in a constructive way. And only by doing that can we come together and make a just transition to a stable and sustainable economy that provides for the needs of all UK citizens, regardless of colour, creed, gender, wealth or status. So the Grant Law Trust is hoping to work with local authorities, charities, community groups, social enterprises, whatever, to use our expertise and organisational culture change to help them deliver better public services within the constrained budgets they have. We'll also be looking to work with businesses on well-being in the workplace, which is, after all, where a lot of people spend a lot of their time. And also how businesses can engage with the communities in which they exist and meet their environmental and social governance goals. And of course, we will be opposing the continuation of austerity, which simply destroys public services and public well-being to prop up a dysfunctional economic system that doesn't recognise the important role a healthy society and a healthy environment plays in delivering economic prosperity. Not an either or, it's all part of the same thing. So there are the three areas where the Grant Law Trust is looking to engage in building back better. It's individual well-being, localisation and sustainable business practice. And the sort of three of our trustees are taking a lead in those different areas. I'm heading up the wellbeing group, Peter's doing localisation, and Paul is looking at business sustainability. And the image on here is a cartoon I came across a few years ago. I was lucky enough to be invited to a conference in Sweden from a project team who are working on the transition to low carbon economies from all sorts of different aspects, from decision making to local renewable energy schemes to goodness knows what. It was an amazing couple of days I spent out there with them. But one of them showed this cartoon as part of the presentation. And it just shows a climate summit and somebody saying, what if climate change is all a big hoax and we created a better world for nothing? And I think that sums it up. Why on earth are we even arguing about this? Why don't we just do it? Well, the why are we arguing about it is something I'm going to be exploring in the next webinar. Why are we so divided? Why do people behave in antisocial ways? And how can we change the political conversation? How can we find the strength and the capability to move forwards, strengthen our communities? And I think it comes back to individual well-being. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next webinar, because I do think there's some tough times ahead, and I think we need to be ready for them. So one of the things we did recently to help support Lindsay through her long journey through COVID-19 was to set up something I'm calling a wellbeing circle, which hopefully the slide will move on to, but never mind. All it is really is just a group of friends that are brought together with a little bit of light touch organisation and communications using WhatsApp or something suitable to any group of individuals. And it provides a safe space for all the individuals in the circle, not just the one they've gathered around, to share and care for each other. It provides practical and emotional support in times of crisis, solace and encouragement when we feel depressed, and laughter and silliness when we're just feeling a bit sorry for ourselves. I mean, after all, that's what friends are for. But there's a very good the quote at the bottom from the Bible: person standing alone is vulnerable, but when you come together with your friends, you're much stronger. You don't have to wait till someone falls ill to create a well-being circle. I mean, maybe you have to have a couple of friends who want to see this transition to a well-being economy, or just want to find out more about what it means. So your circle might simply be a safe space to talk about all your fears and anxieties and share your dreams of a better world with those who are sympathetic to it, rather than people who are going to smack you down for having these silly ideas. And if you'd like to, the Trust would like to be part of those discussions, capture those stories, and help people build strong mutual aid groups. I think we need to surround ourselves with positive energy. We just need to move those who say it can't be done out of the way of the people who are doing it. It did dawn on me preparing this webinar that democracy in the UK is not yet 100 years old. Women only got the vote in 1928, and that's 4 years after my mother was born. I think if our democracy is going to meet the challenge of climate change, it needs to grow up a bit. Citizens need to have much greater involvement in our national well-being than choosing between two parties fighting over market economics every 5 years. That's not democracy, to my way of thinking. And we deserve better. And that is part of building back better, is to have better politics. So the closing slide takes a quote from one of Grant's heroes, Humphrey, beg his pardon. And I think this sums up the choice each of us is facing. We can stand in awe and wonder what happened. We can hold our breath, wait and see what happened. Or we get stuck in and make the change we want to see happen. And to be honest, having got involved in some of these groups like Time for Change and the Wellbeing Alliance and various others, it's so much more fun when you're involved with the people who are planning for the future, rather than the ones who are trying to drag you back to some non-existent past. So these now we've come to the questions that we'd like you to answer in Peter's in the Menti that Peter has set up. And the questions are: what's stopping you from making your new normal different and better, rather than different and worse? And the second one was, if you are already involved in building back better, how can the Grant Will Trust best support you, best help you to achieve that? So those questions will remain open for a couple of days, so you can think about the answers and put them in there. And I think it now only remains for me to say, if you have been, thank you for listening, and get talking. Oh yes, of course. Are there any questions? Should the Trust help change the electoral system that protects the two-party Punch and Judy show? As a charitable organisation, we can involve to a certain extent in politics if they further the aims of the charitable organisation. Well, the aim of the Grant Will Trust is to cultivate inclusive communities. And where a system is driving division, I think we can come at it from that perspective. And what I personally am very keen on is encouraging cross-party working. People of goodwill who are genuinely concerned about delivering for their constituents, representing their constituents, and engaging in conversations about how we resolve some of these issues. I don't care what party they come from or what standpoint they come from, we can start talking constructively. And that, above all, was something that my call to Brendan O'Hara, that I was part of, really brought home to me, because Brendan is he's basically on side with the message. We didn't have to convince him of the importance of environmentalism. But what he didn't do, he allowed it to be swamped by all the other concerns, things, very important things that he's involved with. He works on immigration and social rights and welfare and things, so these are not unimportant things. But I think we got him to change his mind in a slight way, in that he realised that sustainability is at the heart of all these other matters. It's not an add-on, it's the place you start from to do these things. And if the more we can encourage individual politicians to get a hold of that concept, that this is an underpinning, it's where you start from, it's a foundation for the way you look at everything, then the more we can start to have constructive conversations. And when somebody answers, oh yes, but what about, oh, I don't know, the employment or something, you know, if you reduce the airline industry, you're throwing people out of work. Okay, so now we have another problem. We have to address that problem, because we cannot keep supporting an unsustainable industry. We need to then start dealing with the fallout from that decision and move on. So it's constant management of change. So I don't know what others think. I mean, I welcome any comments from Peter and Paul as to what they think perhaps the trust should be doing in terms of changing, you know, actually getting engaged with changing the electoral system. I do live in Scotland, of course, where the politics is quite different to UK politics.
I have unmuted everybody, so if you would like to say something or ask a question or debate or complain or argue, this is the moment to do it. The questions, the last two questions we put up there as to what you are going to change and what is blocking you from change, will be on the Facebook page until the end of the month. So happy to have you or anybody else you know answer them. The more answers we get, the more useful it will be. So we will be putting up a copy of the slides, and we will be putting up the questions on the Facebook page until the end of the month. I guess from tomorrow, probably. Don't know if I'm still going to put them up tonight. So any questions, comments?
It is perhaps worth saying that actually part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is a government group called We Go, which governments or local authorities or anybody like in a position of government, doesn't need to be national government, can sign up to. And Scotland was a founding member. The other members are New Zealand and Iceland, but also Wales, the Welsh Assembly has also signed up to it. So there is this upswelling of people gathering around this idea of a wellbeing economy.
There have been a couple of very interesting developments at my end since I last came on board to this presentation, but they're very specific. There's something happening in Sevenoaks District called the Sevenoaks District Forum, which is for community and voluntary groups. And it's been a fantastic way throughout the pandemic of bringing all the local community and voluntary groups together. Not many people from Edenbridge, but it has involved Mary Perrott from Bridges and Anthony Shipwright, who runs the youth services for all the churches. But it's just been a great way of getting to know and make links with other sort of community and voluntary groups. And today we had a talk about social prescribing, and that's something that's really close to my heart because I'm involved with the mental health choir in Sevenoaks and run a similar sort of group in Edenbridge. And I've just been working for the last few weeks on setting up a kind of volunteer befriending scheme with the Sevenoaks mental health group, with the aim of getting some volunteers to bring people who are isolated, lonely, or have mobility problems or any kind of need to the singing group as a kind of weekly activity for them. And that would tie in very nicely with social prescribing, which has always been a long-term aim of mine. So if we could find enough volunteers, then once we're back together in meeting in person, to link in people who've been referred through social prescribing, the volunteer befrienders could bring them and stay and sing with them and support them through the group. Now, this isn't perhaps strictly relevant to what we've been talking about today, but kind of links into the individual well-being perhaps that we might be talking about next week. But that's one of the things that's come out of this Sevenoaks District Forum. And another thing that's come out of it recently, which I thought Sue particularly might be interested in, is they've been discussing intergenerational skill sharing. And that put me very much in mind of something called the Let's scheme, which Sue might remember we had in Edenbridge. Do you remember that, Sue?
Vaguely, yeah.
It was a sort of checkbook system where you literally shared your skills. So you might offer babysitting, singing lessons, gardening, plumbing, whatever your personal skill was. And you would share that number of hours. I think it was done literally in a time capacity. And you would pay for your whatever it is that you wanted done, somebody clearing your garden perhaps, and you would give them a check, and then somebody else would send their check and use it for something else. And eventually it foundered. It's such a shame. I think it was going for a good few years, and I've been chatting to one or two of the people that were involved with it. I'm not quite sure why eventually we why it floundered. I think probably because some skills were very much overused and other things were not being used enough. But it strikes me that that's something that could be used, and perhaps relates to your localization and your sustainable economy. So I just thought I'd throw those two ideas out there because I think they're both things that really are a big plus point for the future.
Yeah, and I think it's what's interesting, because I get the perspective of having moved to quite a different kind of community, having spent 30-something years in Edenbridge. I think it's going to be a question of people sorting out a way of doing this that works for their community, because what works down in Kent won't necessarily work in Argyll and Bute, because we have a different background. There's much more support for socialism and so on up here. So we come at things a different way from people who are traditional Conservative voters. You just have a different way of looking at things. But that's fine. You just focus on what you're trying to deliver and you go, this works for Sevenoaks and this works for Dunoon. And they're not the same thing, but they get the same end and it's done the same way. Doesn't matter, as long as we're all going to the same place. We don't need to argue with each other. We should just do what works for us as a community. It's the idea that we have to argue about it all is ridiculous. Well, it's just waste of energy when we can get on with doing it. So it's good to hear that the stuff is happening in Edenbridge, and I think to some extent the Let's scheme, yeah.
The thing I'm not sure about really, and maybe you could advise on that, is whether something like that, the skill sharing, whether that would be better at a very local level or a district level, because it seems to have worked only to a certain degree in Edenbridge. It may be that the town's much bigger now. We've got these big new housing estates, lots of people have moved in, so there may be enough skills to go round. Or would that sort of thing work much better at a whole district level, do you think?
Well, I think this should be a question to maybe put to Sevenoaks Council, because I do think councils need to be taking more of a lead on this, because they have the responsibility for delivering public services in the area. And they have a mindset that they can only push out the public services they've got the budget to push out. What they could be doing is acting much more as a coordinator bringing together the voluntary services and the little groups that other people are setting up locally, and saying, actually, some of these skills need to be co-located because you've got to travel to do them, or some of them could be, because they can be done remotely, so they could be district-wide, it doesn't matter. But solely the person, the people to coordinate that kind of thing should be the local district council, because they have the oversight of the area. And so you need a coordinating body, and then you need the little local bodies, groups who are actually delivering activities, but they shouldn't be needing to do this organisational level thing as well. That really, I feel, that should be the council's job. And if you can engage, I'm just actually trying to draft an approach to Argyll and Bute District Council, who are not the most forward-thinking group of people in the world, on behalf of the Time for Change group. But what we're asking for is for them to talk to us, to engage with us, so we can work this out together, and they can make use of the knowledge and expertise that we have. And the same applies with social matters as environmental matters. They can make use of the knowledge, willingness, and expertise of the people on the ground actively, and those people can benefit from coordination and support from the council. So it becomes a cooperative venture, not somebody either coming demanding that somebody does something that they have budget to do, or somebody pushing a service on people that doesn't really fit, or it's a dialogue. It's cooperation, it's collaboration.
We have filled our hour.
Right.
I think we should let these good people go towards their brandy or bed or whatever else fun things they're going to be doing this evening. As I said, the questions will remain up on the Facebook page until the end of the month. Please have a look at them. Please encourage people to answer. I might put them up tonight, but more likely tomorrow. I don't know if Paul or Sue feels like putting them up tonight, but they will be up. And I think there's an interesting discussion, and I suggest that maybe we continue this discussion on Facebook.
Yeah, good idea, Peter. I think brandy's more appropriate than putting stuff up on Facebook. So.
Yeah, my chef just put his head round the door, so I think dinner's ready.
Okay.
So it's a great presentation, Sue. Well done.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank
you, everybody, for participating.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.